If you're new to web development, maybe you've seen some cool animated effects on websites and thought they were really hard to achieve. I'm here to tell you you're wrong, as in this video I'm going to show you just how simple it is to wow users by using CSS transitions. So here we just have a simple 100 pixel by 100 pixel red div, and here is the style for the div. So I'm going to add a hover style using a pseudo selector, and in that I'm going to set the height of the div to 200 pixels. As you can see, when we hover over the div, the height increases, and it decreases when we move the pointer out of the div. The problem at the moment is that it's not animated, it just jumps to be larger, which is very jarring. Making this appear more smoothly is where CSS transitions come in. CSS has a property called transition. We'll apply it to the square class. The value is the property we want to transition, followed by how long we want the transition to take in seconds. So we'll say transition the height and take 1 second to do it. So it's transition 1s. Now when we hover over the square, it smoothly transitions in height. So what's going on here is that we have told the browser whenever the height changes, don't change to the new value straight away. Instead, gradually transition the property from its current value to the new value over the time frame specified here, 1 second. So that's great for one value, but what happens if we want the width of the square to also increase? So we add a new width to the hover selector, making it 200 pixels. But then when we try it, when we hover over, the height increases in a very smooth manner. The width, however, is jumpy. This is because only the width and not the height is included in the CSS transition. So how do we include multiple properties to be transitioned, seeing as there's only one transition property? We can't just add another transition property like this, it would just overwrite the previous one. Instead, transition allows for multiple properties to be transitioned. You just comma separate them. So we add a comma and we add our width transition as well. Now the whole square grows smoothly. Since making a square bigger is cool and all, but not something you'd really use that much on an actual web page, I thought I'd show you a real-world example. So here we have a small text box for search. We want it small initially so it doesn't take up that much screen space, but when the user clicks on it, we want it to expand in width and have the font size get larger so it's more prominent and easier to type into. So I add a pseudo selector for when the input is focused and set the width to 400 pixels and the font size to 20 pixels. Then I go into the class for the input and I add a transition for both the width and the font size, and we're going to make the transition length for each 0.5 seconds. I've actually done it wrong for width, change it, okay. And then when we click into the search text box, it really pops out at us in a smooth manner and then goes back when it loses focus. So just a quick caveat and then a quick tip to finish up on. So the caveat is that only absolute values can be transitioned. What do I mean by absolute values? Anything that's a number is a good rule of thumb. So say we have a div which has no set height. This means the height will be auto, which means it just expands as we add content. So you can't then transition the height to say 500 pixels. This is because the browser needs a set value to transition from and to in order to be able to calculate the transition, and auto isn't a set value. So you can only transition if you set the height before and after the transition to some actual numerical value. Colors, for example, can be transitioned because a hex code for a color is actually a number. Now for my final tip, we've seen the use of pseudo selectors like focus and hover to trigger the change in property that allows for a transition, but this is limited in application. For more flexibility, you can use JavaScript to add classes to elements when certain events occur. When applying the new class changes CSS properties for an element, any CSS transitions set for those properties will come into effect. By doing this, you could trigger a CSS animation via an onClick, for example. So when the user clicks on an element, you could add a class to it and it triggers transitions.